in this tutorial, I'm going to show you how you can make an accessible form. And when I say accessible, what I mean by that is it's ADA accessible according to Section 508 of the Americans with Disabilities Act. And that's actually very important. A lot of times when you first learn how to do forms, there's not a lot of focus on the accessibility part, but the reality is that people who use screen readers and also like for search engines and stuff too, they can't necessarily read forms or use them at all properly if they're not written for accessibility. So we're going to build an accessible form. And so this is an example of a form that I'm going to show you how to make, right? Something that looks like this. It's a sign up form for a volunteer event, right? Or it's an event, I guess, that you sign up as a volunteer to participate in, right? So, so the thing is, if you were to look at this form, this is like, you know, nice and styled and stuff, but without any styling, this is what that same form would look like, just with default browser styling. All right, and we're gonna talk about how you can get, you know, from this to something that looks like this, right? Now, the first thing that you would need to do whenever you're making a form is you really need to think about what's important to gather from your users. After all, that is what forms are for. It's for gathering user input. And so there are different things that can happen on the other end of a form, right? So your form might interact with a database, right? So there might be something in your website or in your application that takes the data that the user input and then somehow sticks it into a database. It could also be that the form will send an email. Maybe that's how it generates the feedback information, is that it goes into somebody's inbox. Anyway, but the point is that forms are also, you know, they're really useful. They're also very dangerous potentially if they're not done well. And so one thing about what we're going to be doing is that the forms that you're going to be making are not going to be real forms. They're going to be forms that do execute something, but I will show you. So let's fill this form out and I'll show you what's going to happen with this form information. So if I click here, right off the bat, one of the things that you probably are accustomed to having, as well as I am on my computer, is that you've got this auto population stuff that is based off of other forms that you filled out. So if you have something that sees an input type as a name, it's going to automatically look up your name information, and it's going to have associated data that would also go with those other types of fields. For instance, you see there below there's an email field, there's also a telephone field, a password field. And so as long as you're properly assigning the correct type of field for your forms, then that's one of the things that will allow for people's auto population things to work in browsers. And so a lot of the stuff that you see up above on mine is it's grayed out, right? So I'm just gonna put something else in, and then so it gives me some choices. Like I might choose some of these different options. Let's go ahead and do that. I'll use my work information, which is public, all right? And then the other thing too is that if I have something that looks like a password field, I'm just going to put, you know, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. But if you designate something as a password field, then it knows to put bullets whenever you're typing on a screen so that somebody can't be looking over your shoulder and see a password. And then down here, there's an age requirement asking, you know, which of these things is true. And you'll notice that this is a radio button type of field. So that means that you can only choose one of these three options. This is referred to as a radio group. We'll get to that later, but I'm older than 18. And then down here, this is a checkbox. Checkboxes are different than radio buttons in that you're not just forced to choose one and only one. You can have multiple choices. So in this case, what I'm asking is, hey, what kind of volunteer positions are you willing to do? So, you know, we'll just put a few things. Okay. And then at the bottom, it's asking for special skills. So this is something where you could type and it's not predefined information. So, and that's one of the things about forms too, is that if you let somebody type stuff, into a field like this, then that's where some of the danger actually occurs, where somebody could do possible injections of code that could mess up a database or something like that, or that could turn your email into a spam relay or something like that. And so you kind of have to be careful with what you type in here. So I'll just put this is a test. Okay. And then, but like for things up here, like the checkboxes and the radio buttons, that is predefined data. And I'll show you later how you can do that. So you have to decide the values that would get passed based on the things that you're actually selecting here. Okay. And again, these are text inputs, but this is a text input with the type of text. And these other ones are inputs that are like the type of email, the type of phone, the type of password, and so on. So when I come down here and I click on submit, what this particular form is going to do is it's going to execute your data. It's not going to send an email or anything like that. It's going to go to a form execution page that will read back all of the information that you pass through, just so you know what this form is ultimately going to do. And I'll show you how to do this in the demo as well. But this is the way that your information is passed along in a form, is that you get this thing called a key, and then it has a value. So every key should have a value. Sometimes a key can have multiple values, but in this case, this key has one value. All right, so we've got the key name is full name. And if you remember back from this sign up form, right, it actually says first and last name, right? So the thing that we see right here where it says full name, that is the key that you don't see on the front end, but you would see it in the back end. That's what you would type as your key name. And then you would get the value of, and the value is what the user inputs, right? The email is the key, and then the user input is this. TEL is the key, right? And so on. And so this is the kind of stuff where it could either get piped into a database that gets managed, right? Like a sign up list or something. It could go into some sort of volunteer database, or it could go to somebody's email, and then they just take this information and they write it down and do whatever they need to do with it. But there are lots of different things that could happen with this, and the idea though is that whenever you do something with a form, it's supposed to be useful, and so it's going to execute something. And when you execute something that either sends something into a database or it's sending something to email, then that's where the sort of the danger factor comes in, where if somebody was trying to do something malicious or like a spam robot or something like that hit your page, then you need to make sure that the form is actually secure enough. We're not going to get into all those details because that gets into other types of scripting, like with JavaScript and with PHP and other kinds of dynamic programming languages. All right, just so you understand though that that's what's on the other end of a form, is usually some sort of dynamic scripting that does something special with that information. And that's what you're looking at here. Is I created a script page that actually will generate this page that you're looking at. It generates this page with this array of information that was passed from that form. So in this class, we're not going beyond that. What we're learning is what in fact a form actually does, just in a general sense, how it passes the information, like in terms of storing stuff in an array of keys with values, associated values, and also how to build that form so that users can actually use it, and also how to style it so that it looks good. Okay, all right, so that's going to be the sort of scope of this assignment, and you can just move on from here and we'll jump right into brackets. So go ahead and open up brackets and then create a new folder that is for this particular assignment, and we'll get started then.